Billionaire tried to impress Black Waitress with $1,000 tip. But she did this instead. Victoria's hands trembled as she set the water glass down in front of him. 10 years. 10 years since she'd heard that voice, seen that face, felt that familiar dread creeping up her spine. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. To him, she'd never been a person. Just another assistant he could manipulate, use, discard. "I'll have the usual," David Wright said without looking at her menu, without looking at her. She stood there, pen poised over her notepad, watching him scroll through his phone like the world revolved around his fingertips. His Rolex caught the diner light. His tailored suit cost more than her monthly rent. Everything about him screamed power, control, untouchability. "Coming right up," Victoria said quietly. He glanced up for exactly 1 second. His eyes passed over her face like she was invisible. That was the moment she knew. He had no memory of what he'd done to her. No guilt. No shame. Just another day. Another waitress. Another opportunity. She turned towards the kitchen, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. 30 minutes later, David Wright finished his meal. He pulled out his wallet, black leather, thick with cash, and Victoria watched as he counted out bills. 500. 600. 700. He paused, smiled to himself like he'd just made a brilliant decision, and placed a $1,000 bill on the table. "Keep the change, sweetheart," he said, still not making eye contact. $1,000. A tip meant to make her grateful. Meant to make her feel special, chosen, lucky. Meant to make her forget she was nobody. Victoria stared at that bill for 3 seconds. Around her, other customers had fallen silent. They'd seen it. Everyone had seen his casual cruelty dressed up as generosity. She picked up the bill. David Wright stood to leave, already reaching for his phone, already moving on to the next conquest, the next person to destroy. "Mr. Wright," Victoria said. He turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Her voice was steady, ice cold. His face went blank. "My name is Victoria Monroe. 10 years ago, you were my boss. And what you did to me..." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle in the air between them. "Is about to cost you everything." The diner went silent. David Wright's face drained of color. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. May today bring you joy and blessings. Now, let's begin. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Victoria clocked in at 5 a.m., 3 years. She'd been working at Rosie's Diner for 3 years, and it was the first job where nobody knew her past. Nobody knew she used to wear Prada heels and carry a leather portfolio. Nobody knew she'd been broken. "Morning, Vic," Rosie called from the kitchen. "Coffee's fresh." "Thanks, Rosie," Victoria replied, tying her apron with practiced precision. The apron cost $12. Her old worksuit used to cost $2,000. She'd chosen this life deliberately. The predictability, the honesty. Customers came, ordered food, left. No games, no manipulation, no power plays that ended with her crying in a bathroom stall. Across the city, David Wright was waking up in a penthouse that touched the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like he owned it. In many ways, he did. His net worth was $4.7 billion. He had 3 ex-wives, 2 adult children who barely spoke to him, and a reputation for being ruthless, the kind of ruthless that made other billionaires nervous. "Cancel my 9 a.m., he told his assistant over the phone while still in bed. "I'm going to Rosie's. I need eggs." His assistant, a terrified 24-year-old named Jennifer, typed frantically. "Yes, Mr. Wright." "Should I?" "Just do it," he snapped, already hanging up. David Wright didn't ask permission. He didn't explain himself. He moved through the world like a man who'd never been told no. Victoria's first table was a couple celebrating their anniversary. She brought them coffee, smiled genuinely, took their order. This was what she loved about the diner. Real human connection. No pretense. "You seem happy," the woman said. "Working here, I mean. You have real warmth." Victoria paused. "I am happy. More than I've been in a long time." It was true. The simplicity of her life now. Waking up, going to work, attending night classes, saving money, helping other women in her support group, felt like redemption. Like she'd clawed her way back from hell. She didn't know that hell was about to walk through those doors. The bell above the diner entrance chimed at 6:47 a.m. Victoria was refilling coffee when she saw him. The world stopped. Her hands went cold. The coffee pot nearly slipped from her fingers. David Wright walked in like he owned the place, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled. His phone was already to his ear. "I don't care what the board wants," he was saying. "We're acquiring them anyway. Send the papers." He sat in booth number 7, Victoria's section. She took 3 deep breaths. Professional. She could do this. He didn't recognize her. He would never recognize her. She was a ghost to him. She walked over, notepad in hand. "Good morning. What can I get you?" Her voice was steady, controlled. "Coffee. Black. Eggs over easy. Wheat toast." He didn't look up from his phone. "Coming right up." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Hey, you got a name?" Victoria's stomach dropped. She turned back slowly. "Victoria," she said. "Victoria," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. Still no recognition in his eyes. "Pretty name. Bring extra butter with those eggs." She nodded and walked to the kitchen, her legs feeling like they might collapse. In the kitchen, she gripped the counter. Her breathing quickened. 10 years. 10 years of therapy, of healing, of forgetting. And he was sitting 30 feet away like it was just another Tuesday. "You okay?" Rosie asked, concerned. "Fine," Victoria lied. "Just need a minute." She brought his food 10 minutes later. David Wright was on his second phone call, barking orders about stock prices and hostile takeovers. He barely acknowledged her as she set the plate down. "Anything else?" she asked. "No," he said dismissively, waving her away. Victoria walked back to the counter where another customer was waiting. An older man, probably 70, who came in every Tuesday for pancakes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently. "Something like that," Victoria whispered. She watched David Wright eat his eggs, make his calls, completely oblivious to the fact that the person serving him had once begged him to stop touching her without permission, that she'd cried in his office bathroom, that he'd threatened her job when she refused his advances, that he'd erased her from his life like she'd never existed. He finished eating at 7:22 a.m. He pulled out his wallet, black leather, bulging with $100 bills. He counted out bills slowly, deliberately, like he was performing for an audience. $500, $600, $700. He paused, smiled to himself like he'd just made a brilliant decision. He placed a $1,000 bill on the table. "Keep the change, sweetheart," he said, still not making eye contact, already reaching for his phone. Victoria stared at that bill. Around the diner, other customers had fallen silent. A woman at the counter gasped. An older man shook his head in disbelief. $1,000 for eggs and coffee. But Victoria understood what it really was. It was his arrogance, his casual cruelty disguised as generosity, his way of saying, "I have so much money that your entire existence is pocket change to me." She picked up the bill with 2 fingers like it was poisoned. "Mr. Wright," she said. Her voice was ice. He turned, annoyed at the interruption, already moving on. "Do you remember me?" she asked. His face went blank. My name is Victoria Monroe. 10 years ago, you were my boss. And what you did to me." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle between them like a bomb. "Is about to cost you everything." The diner went completely silent. David Wright's face drained of color. "I have receipts," Victoria continued, her voice steady and cold. "Text messages, emails. 3 other women who are ready to testify, and I've already contacted a lawyer." His phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the table. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he whispered, but his voice was shaking. "Actually," Victoria said, "I know exactly who you are. Everyone in this diner is about to know, too." What David didn't know was that Victoria had spent the last 6 months planning this moment. What Victoria didn't know was that David had done this to 20 other women, and 3 of them had already reached out to her through her support group. What neither of them knew was that a journalist from the New York Times was sitting in booth 9, recording every word. "Call my lawyer," David Wright said, his voice cracking as he stood up from the booth. "Right now." "Too late," Victoria replied, not moving. "He already knows. Everyone's going to know." The diner had erupted into whispers. Phones were coming out. The older man in booth 9, the one Victoria had thought was just another regular, was speaking quietly into his jacket. Reporter. Had to be. David's face was turning purple. "You have no idea what you're about to do. I will destroy you. I will destroy your life." "You already did," Victoria said coldly. 10 years ago. This is just the cleanup." He stormed toward the door, knocking over his coffee cup. It shattered on the tile floor. Fitting, Victoria thought. Everything about him was breaking now. Rosie came running over. "Vic, what the hell just happened?" "Justice," Victoria whispered. But as David's car pulled away from the curb, Victoria's hands began to shake. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. And now, there was no going back. 10 years earlier, Victoria was 24 years old, fresh out of community college with an associate's degree in business administration. She had dreams. She had ambition. She had no idea what was about to destroy her. David Wright's tech company, Wright Industries, was the hottest startup in Manhattan. He was 38 then, already worth hundreds of millions, already known for being demanding but brilliant. When Victoria got hired as his executive assistant, her mother cried happy tears. "This is your big break, baby," her mother had said. "You're going to change your life." Her mother had no idea how true that would be. The first week was normal. Victoria answered phones, scheduled meetings, organized his calendar. David was demanding but professional. He barely spoke to her directly. The second week, he asked her to stay late. "I need you to reorganize these files," he'd said, gesturing to a stack of documents. "Tonight. Before the board meeting tomorrow." "Of course," Victoria replied, sitting down at her desk. It was 10 p.m. when he came back to her cubicle. Everyone else had gone home. The office was empty except for security downstairs. "You're still here," he said, standing very close to her desk. "You asked me to finish," she replied, not looking up. "Smart girl. Dedicated." He paused. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Victoria looked up. He was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd found his prey. "You're going to go far," he said, "if you're willing to do what it takes." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her stomach tightening. "Come to my office. I want to discuss your career trajectory." She followed him. She was young. She was naive. She didn't understand the subtext of his words. In his office, with the city lights spread out below them like conquered territory, David closed the door. "You remind me of someone," he said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one. "Someone I used to know, before she got smart and left me." "I don't drink," Victoria said quietly. "You do now," he replied, handing her the glass. She didn't drink it. She held it, her fingers trembling slightly. I'm going to make you a promise, David said, sitting on the edge of his desk. If you stick with me, if you're loyal to me, I will make you rich. Not rich like normal people. Rich like me. You'll never have to worry about money again. You'll have everything you want. That's very generous, Victoria said carefully. It's not generous, he corrected. It's an investment. In you. In us. Us? Victoria repeated. You're smart. Too smart to be stupid about this. He stepped closer. I want you. Not just as an assistant. As my woman. My personal woman. Victoria's heart was pounding. Mr. Wright, I don't think. Don't think, he interrupted. Just listen. No one needs to know. You'll get a promotion, a raise, a private office. You'll be untouchable. Everyone will know you're mine, and they'll respect you because of it. I'm not interested, Victoria said, standing up. Sit down, he commanded. She sat. The power dynamic had shifted in one sentence. He was her boss. She was 24. She needed this job. For the next 8 months, Victoria endured what she later learned to call grooming. David would touch her arm when he passed her desk. He'd compliment her appearance, then criticize what she wore if she changed her style. He'd text her at midnight, asking her to come to his apartment to work on projects. When she refused, he'd become cold the next day, ignoring her, making her feel invisible. Then he'd apologize, bring her flowers, and promise it would never happen again. The cycle repeated. Hope, then devastation. Again and again. You're the only one who understands me, he'd whisper while his hands wandered. The only one I trust. But Victoria didn't trust him. She was terrified of him. One night in February, he demanded more than just touching. No, Victoria said firmly. No, David. I'm not doing this. His face changed. The charming mask slipped away, revealing the cruelty underneath. You think you're special, he hissed. You think you're the first girl to say no to me? There are 20 other women who would kill for your position, literally kill for it. And you're going to throw it away? I quit, Victoria said, standing up. I'm leaving. You quit? He laughed, a cold, terrible sound. Baby, I'm going to make sure you never work in the city again. I'm going to call every company, every firm, every startup. I'm going to tell them you're a liar, a thief, and a slut. Do you understand me? Your career is over. Your reputation is finished. Victoria was shaking. You can't do that. Watch me, he said. He did exactly what he promised. Within 2 weeks, Victoria couldn't get hired anywhere. Her references were destroyed. Rumors spread through the industry that she was unstable, difficult, untrustworthy. Companies that had seemed interested suddenly ghosted her. She couldn't pay her rent. She lost her apartment. She moved back in with her mother, who was already sick with diabetes. Victoria worked minimum wage jobs just to survive. She developed panic attacks. She couldn't sleep without nightmares. She'd see his face in crowds, and her body would go rigid with fear. Her mother asked what happened, but Victoria couldn't tell her. The shame was too heavy. The blame felt like it was somehow her fault, for being young, for trusting him, for not fighting harder. 2 years later, her mother died. Victoria was alone with her grief, her trauma, and the crushing weight of David Wright's cruelty. She didn't contact authorities. She didn't go to the media. She didn't reach out to other victims. She just survived. She got a GED. She worked as a waitress. She went to therapy. Slowly, painfully, she rebuilt herself. But she never forgot. And she never stopped keeping evidence. Every time she saw a news article about David Wright acquiring another company, she'd research it. Every time she heard rumors about his behavior with women, she'd document it. She'd found the other victims through support groups and online forums. She'd been building a case for years, waiting for the right moment. The journalist in booth 9 was already typing. By tomorrow morning, the story would be everywhere. By next week, federal investigators would open an inquiry. By next month, David Wright's empire would start crumbling. But Victoria didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that for the first time in 10 years, the weight on her chest was lifting. She'd finally done it. She'd finally stood up. And she wasn't alone anymore. 3 other women were preparing to come forward. 2 more had already contacted their lawyers. The journalist had names, dates, evidence. This wasn't just about Victoria anymore. This was about all of them. As Victoria wiped down the counter at Rosie's diner, she allowed herself one small smile. The emotional cycle had completed, from despair to hope to action to triumph. But she didn't know that the real battle was just beginning. What Victoria didn't know was that David Wright had already called his most expensive lawyers, and they were preparing a counterattack. What the journalists didn't know was that David had evidence too. Private recordings of conversations he'd doctored and manipulated, character witnesses he'd paid off, and a narrative ready to paint Victoria as a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta. What none of them knew was that David's ex-wife from 15 years ago had been keeping her own secrets, and she was about to become a witness that could either destroy or save David completely. By 8 a.m., the story was everywhere. Billionaire David Wright accused of sexual harassment by multiple women, screamed the headline on the New York Times. The journalist, John Morris, had published his first article with Victoria's name, 3 corroborating witnesses, and timeline of abuse spanning over a decade. Victoria's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets, other women who'd worked for David, support group members celebrating, her lawyer, Patricia Davis, calling with updates. "They're already preparing a defense," Patricia said over the phone. "Wright's legal team is claiming this is a coordinated attack. They're saying you're lying for attention and money." "I don't want his money," Victoria said quietly. "I want the truth." "I know," Patricia replied, "but he has 12 lawyers and unlimited resources. This is going to get messy before it gets better." By noon, David Wright had released a statement through his lawyers. "These allegations are completely false and defamatory. I have never engaged in inappropriate behavior with any employee. This appears to be a coordinated campaign by a disgruntled former assistant with personal grievances. I will pursue all legal avenues to protect my reputation and my family." The statement made Victoria's blood boil. Not because it was dishonest, but because it was so effective. Within hours, his PR team had flooded social media with counter-narratives. Photos of David with his adult children, testimonials from employees praising his leadership. Think pieces about how easily false allegations destroy good men. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Amber. "Some people on Twitter are saying you're lying, saying you're doing this for money and attention. Are you okay?" Victoria wasn't okay. She felt the weight of the world's judgment pressing down on her. This was exactly what David had warned her about 10 years ago. The isolation, the humiliation, the feeling that no one would believe her. But then her phone buzzed again. A text from Karen Smith, one of the other victims. "Don't listen to the noise. I'm standing with you. I'm going on camera tomorrow and telling my story. We're going to win this." Then another text from Rebecca Martinez. "My lawyer says we have a case. David's been doing this for 20 years. We have receipts from the 2000s. You're not alone." Then another. "I'm coming forward too. I kept my journals. Everything. We've got him." Victoria's fear began to shift. She wasn't alone. She had 3 other women now, all with evidence, all ready to testify. The power dynamic was changing. Patricia called back at 3 p.m. "We need to talk strategy. David's team just sent a cease and desist letter. They're threatening to sue you for defamation." "For what?" Victoria asked, her anger rising. For telling the truth? For damages to his reputation, Patricia explained. They're claiming your allegations are unsubstantiated and malicious. They want you to issue a public retraction. Absolutely not, Victoria said. I didn't think you would, Patricia replied. But I need to warn you. He's also threatening to sue the New York Times for publishing without adequate fact-checking. He's going to make this expensive and ugly. Are you prepared for that? Victoria thought about the 10 years she'd spent rebuilding her life, the nightmares, the therapy sessions, the shame she'd carried in silence. I'm prepared, she said firmly. That evening, Victoria sat down for an on-camera interview with a local news station. Her hands were shaking as the interviewer, a woman named Diane Thompson, asked her to recount what happened. I was 24, Victoria began. I was excited to have my first real job at a prestigious company. I had no idea what I was walking into. The words came slowly at first, then faster. She talked about the grooming, the isolation, the threats, the way David had systematically destroyed her career and her self-worth. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Diane asked gently. Because I was ashamed, Victoria said, her voice breaking. I blamed myself. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood his intentions. I thought maybe I'd done something to encourage it. That's what happens when someone with that much power manipulates you. You internalize the blame. Diane leaned forward. But you didn't do anything wrong. I know that now, Victoria replied, tears streaming down her face. It took 10 years and therapy to understand that. But I know it now. The interview aired that night. Within hours, it had been viewed 3 million times. The next morning, something unexpected happened. David's ex-wife, Catherine Wright, gave an interview to the same news station. I was married to David for 8 years, Catherine said on camera. During that time, I watched him coerce and manipulate multiple women. I was too afraid to speak out because I had young children, and he'd threatened to take them from me. But watching this young woman's courage, I realize I can't stay silent anymore. Catherine detailed her own story of emotional abuse. She talked about discovering texts between David and various employees. She talked about confronting him and his cold dismissal of her concerns. He told me it was none of my business, Catherine said. He told me that these women were lucky to have the opportunity to be close to him. He truly believed he was entitled to their bodies, their time, and their loyalty. And when they said no, he destroyed them. The interview was devastating. It corroborated Victoria's story completely. And it came from someone with insider knowledge, with no personal grievance except moral conscience. David's legal team immediately issued another statement. Catherine Wright's allegations are driven by vindictiveness following our divorce. She has a documented history of mental health issues and is seeking attention and sympathy. We will address these false claims in court. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. Victoria was no longer a disgruntled employee. She was a survivor. Multiple survivors. David's next move was to call Patricia directly. I want to meet with Victoria, he said, his voice eerily calm. Without lawyers, just the two of us. Patricia was skeptical. Absolutely not. That's exactly what he wants. But Victoria surprised her. I'll meet him, she said. Victoria, that's not smart, Patricia warned. He could use anything you say against you in court. I don't care, Victoria replied. I want to hear what he has to say. I want to see him. I want him to know that I'm not afraid of him anymore. They met at a neutral location, a private room at a coffee shop in Midtown. David arrived first, and Victoria watched him through the glass door before entering. He looked diminished somehow. The arrogance was still there, but it was cracking. Victoria, he said, standing when she entered. Thank you for coming. Don't thank me, she replied coldly, sitting across from him. I want to apologize David said, his voice measured. For what I did to you. For how I treated you. Victoria's heart raced. Was this real? Was he actually admitting it? Too late, she said flatly. I know, David replied. I know it's too late for apologies. But I want you to understand something. What I did to you, what I did to all of those women, it wasn't about you. It was about my own need for control. My own insecurity masked as arrogance. I don't care, Victoria said. I don't care what your motivations were. You hurt me. You hurt 17 other women. And now you're going to face consequences. David's eyes filled with tears. I know, and I deserve to. But I'm asking you, as one human being to another, to consider accepting a settlement, to let this end without destroying me completely. Victoria stood up. You already destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure you're held accountable. Victoria, please. My name is Victoria Monroe, she said, her voice ice cold. Not sweetheart, not girl, Victoria Monroe. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. She walked out of the coffee shop, her head held high. Pause for a moment. Comment what you think should happen next. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. Your voice matters. May your heart be guided with wisdom and courage. What David didn't know was that Victoria had been wearing a wire during their entire meeting, legally recorded by Patricia's private investigator for protection. What Victoria didn't know was that the FBI had opened a formal investigation into Wright Industries and was about to issue subpoenas for all company communications. What neither of them knew was that David's confession during their private meeting, captured on audio, would become the smoking gun that federal prosecutors needed to build their case. And what nobody knew was that David's second wife, Nicole Sullivan, had just contacted the FBI with evidence of financial crimes that went far beyond sexual harassment. The FBI showed up at Wright Industries headquarters at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Special Agent Thomas Morrison handed David Wright a federal subpoena as he sat in his corner office overlooking the city he thought he owned. Two other agents flanked Morrison, their faces expressionless. Mr. Wright, we need to speak with you regarding our investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and coercion at your company, Morrison said formally. We're also investigating financial irregularities in your accounting practices. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say can and will be used against you. David's face went white. I want my lawyer. Of course, Morrison replied. But understand that we've already interviewed 20 women. We have corporate communications spanning 15 years. We have evidence of hush money payments disguised as severance packages. We have everything we need. What we need from you is the truth. By noon, news helicopters were circling Wright Industries. The stock price had plummeted 40%. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove David as CEO pending investigation. His bank accounts were being frozen as part of the federal inquiry. Victoria watched it all from Rosie's diner, where news crews had set up outside, trying to get her on camera for quotes. I'm not doing interviews, she told Rosie firmly. Let the evidence speak for itself. But her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Other victims were calling, sharing their own stories, asking for advice on coming forward. Law firms were calling, offering to represent them pro bono. Support groups were texting, celebrating the victory. Then Patricia called with news that changed everything. The FBI wants you to testify before a grand jury, Patricia said. They're building a federal case for obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and sexual harassment under Title VII. Your testimony is critical. When? Victoria asked. Tomorrow, Patricia replied. 9 a.m., Federal Courthouse downtown. Victoria's stomach tightened. This was it. This was the moment where she would have to stand in front of a jury and relive the worst 10 years of her life. The moment where David could cross-examine her, could try to discredit her, could make her question herself all over again. "I'll be there," she said. That evening, David Wright did something unexpected. He called Victoria directly. "How did you get this number?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I have people," he replied. His voice was different now, broken, desperate. "Victoria, I'm begging you. Please don't do this. Don't testify tomorrow." "Give me one reason why I shouldn't," Victoria said coldly. "Because I'm going to kill myself," David said flatly. "If you testify, if this goes to trial, if everything comes out, I'm going to end my life. And that's going to be on you." Victoria's breath caught. This was a manipulation tactic. She knew it. She recognized it immediately from years of therapy and support group meetings. It was classic abuser behavior, creating a false choice, making the victim responsible for his survival. But it still made her heart race. "That's not my responsibility," she said. "I have 2 children," David continued, his voice cracking. "They're going to grow up knowing their father was a monster, knowing their father killed himself because of what I did. Is that what you want? Do you want to destroy innocent children?" "Your children have a choice," Victoria replied, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "They can recognize the pattern of abuse you've taught them, and they can break it. Or they can continue it. But that's not my responsibility either. Please," David begged, "just accept the settlement. Just take the money and go away. Let me keep some dignity." Victoria felt something shift inside her. For the first time in this entire ordeal, she felt no fear, no anger, just clarity. "David, listen to me very carefully," she said. "I'm going to testify tomorrow. I'm going to tell the truth. And whatever happens to you after that is the direct result of your own choices. Not mine. Yours. You chose to manipulate women. You chose to threaten them. You chose to destroy their lives. And now you're choosing to manipulate me one last time. I'm not going to let you." She hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From power. The next morning, Victoria walked into the federal courthouse with Patricia by her side. News cameras exploded in flashes. Reporters shouted questions. Other victims stood outside holding signs. "Accountability now," and "His crimes matter." Inside the grand jury room, Victoria sat in the witness chair across from Special Agent Morrison and 12 jurors. A court reporter typed silently, capturing every word. "Ms. Monroe," Morrison began, "can you please describe the first incident of sexual harassment you experienced with David Wright?" Victoria took a deep breath and told her story. All of it. The grooming, the manipulation, the threats, the way he'd systematically destroyed her career and her self-worth. The jurors listened intently, taking notes. One woman had tears streaming down her face. When Morrison finished his questions, David's defense attorney, a shark named Richard Holloway, stood up to cross-examine her. "Ms. Monroe, isn't it true that you filed for a promotion shortly after the alleged harassment began?" Holloway asked sharply. "Yes," Victoria replied calmly, "because I was being groomed and manipulated into believing that sexual compliance was necessary for career advancement." "Isn't it also true that you accepted a severance package when you left the company?" "Yes, with a non-disclosure agreement attached that prevented me from speaking about what happened," Victoria said. "That's not consent. That's silencing." Holloway pressed harder, but Victoria didn't break. She'd spent 10 years processing her trauma in therapy. She knew the manipulation tactics. She recognized the gaslighting, and she refused to be gaslit again. After 3 hours of questioning, the grand jury had heard everything they needed to hear. Special Agent Morrison stood up and looked directly at Victoria. "Thank you for your courage," he said. Your testimony is going to make a real difference." By 6 p.m. that evening, the FBI had made their move. David Wright was arrested at his penthouse and charged with 18 federal counts: sexual harassment, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and tax evasion related to hush money payments. News networks cut to breaking coverage immediately. Legal analysts discussed whether he'd face prison time. Business reporters talked about the collapse of his company and the shareholder lawsuits piling up. Late-night comedians made jokes about his downfall. But Victoria didn't watch any of it. Instead, she went to Rosie's Diner, put on her apron, and did what she'd been doing for 3 years. She took care of people. She brought coffee to customers. She smiled genuinely. She existed in a space where her value wasn't determined by a man's power. Around 8 p.m., the other 3 victims, Karen, Rebecca, and Jessica, walked into the diner. "We wanted to celebrate with you," Karen said, hugging Victoria. "We wanted you to know that your courage gave us courage." Victoria hugged them back, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in 10 years, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. Real hope. Not the fragile kind that could be destroyed by a man's manipulation, but the solid, unshakable kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing and survived it. "What happens now?" Jessica asked, sitting down in a booth. "Now we wait," Patricia said, joining them. "The trial will take months. David's team will fight hard. But we have the evidence, we have multiple witnesses, and we have the truth on our side." "And if he gets convicted?" Rebecca asked. "Federal prison," Patricia replied. "Minimum 10 years, likely more. He'll be a registered sex offender. His company will be dissolved. His assets will be seized for restitution and settlements." Victoria listened to all of this, the facts, the legal outcomes, and the practical consequences of David's choices, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Not triumph exactly. Not anger or satisfaction. Just peace. What Victoria didn't know was that David had already contacted a fixer, someone who'd helped powerful men disappear before. What the FBI didn't know was that David had been transferring assets offshore for months, preparing an escape route. What nobody anticipated was that one of David's ex-wives would betray him to federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity, revealing that he'd committed crimes far worse than sexual harassment, crimes involving international trafficking networks and organized crime connections. And what nobody expected was that Victoria's testimony would lead federal investigators to 20 additional victims spanning 25 years. A pattern so egregious that the case would become the largest corporate sexual abuse prosecution in federal history. 6 months later, Victoria walked into federal court for David Wright's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the hallways outside. Other victims sat in the gallery. 20 women who'd found their voices because Victoria found hers first. Their families were there too. Mothers, sisters, daughters, friends. A community of survivors. David sat at the defense table in an orange prison jumpsuit. He'd already spent the last 6 months in federal custody awaiting trial. His lawyers had negotiated a plea deal. He'd agreed to plead guilty to 15 of the 18 counts. No trial. No lengthy prosecution. Just a confession and sentencing. The judge, the Honorable Ellie Clark, entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. "This case," Judge Clark began, looking directly at David, "represents one of the most egregious patterns of sexual harassment and abuse I have ever witnessed in my 30 years on the bench. The defendant systematically preyed on vulnerable young women, exploited his position of power, and used his wealth to silence victims and obstruct justice." Victoria watched David's face as the judge spoke. He was crying now. Real tears, or crocodile tears. She didn't care anymore. His tears were no longer her responsibility. Mr. Wright, you will serve a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. Upon release, you will be subject to 10 years of supervised probation. You will pay restitution to each victim in the amount of $500,000. You will forfeit all assets derived from illegal activities, totaling approximately $2 billion. And you will be registered as a sex offender for the remainder of your natural life. 15 years. $500 million in restitution. His entire empire was dismantled. Victoria felt the other victims grab her hand and squeeze it. Karen on one side, Rebecca on the other. They were crying, tears of relief, of justice, of finally being believed. As David was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked back at Victoria one last time. She met his eyes calmly. No fear, no anger. Just the simple recognition of a human being who'd finally been held accountable for his choices. Outside the courtroom, the victims gave a joint statement to the press. Today, justice was served, Karen said, speaking into the microphone. Not just for us, but for every woman who's ever been silenced by a powerful man. Victoria Monroe showed us that speaking truth matters, that our stories matter, that we matter. Victoria stood beside her, and when asked if she had anything to say, she stepped to the microphone. For 10 years, I carried shame that wasn't mine to carry, Victoria said, her voice steady and clear. I thought I was broken. I thought I was alone. I thought I'd never be able to reclaim my life. But today, I want every survivor watching this to know, you are not broken. You are not alone. And you deserve justice. You deserve your life back. The crowd erupted in applause. 3 weeks later, Victoria received her first restitution check, $500,000. Her hands shook as she looked at it. She called her mother's best friend, Mrs. Johnson, who'd been like an aunt to her. Mama would be so proud of you, Mrs. Johnson said over the phone, crying happy tears. She knew you were strong. She always knew. Victoria used that money intentionally. She paid off her student loans. She put a down payment on a small apartment in a safe neighborhood. She established a foundation called Reclaim, dedicated to supporting survivors of workplace sexual harassment with legal fees, therapy, job training, and emergency housing. The foundation's first grant recipient was another woman, a 25-year-old named Lisa, who just fled an abusive corporate situation. Victoria trained her, mentored her, helped her rebuild her life. How did you get so strong? Lisa asked Victoria one day, while they were going over job applications. I didn't, Victoria replied honestly. I got tired of being weak. There's a difference. Strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you build by refusing to accept less than you deserve. 9 months after David's sentencing, Victoria graduated from nursing school. She wore a cap and gown at the ceremony, and when her name was called, the entire back section of the auditorium, the victims, their families, and the staff from Rosie's Diner, stood and applauded. Rosie, her boss for the past 4 years, hugged her backstage. I always knew you were going to do something amazing, Rosie said. From the first day you walked in, I could see it. You've got that thing, that light that no amount of darkness can extinguish. Victoria became a nurse at a women's health clinic that served survivors of trauma and abuse. She used her experience to help other women navigate recovery. She listened. She validated. She reminded them that healing was possible because she'd done it herself. 1 year after David's sentencing, the other victims had each moved forward too. Karen had started a podcast called Breaking Silence that reached millions of listeners. She interviewed survivors from all industries and all backgrounds and helped them reclaim their narratives. Rebecca had become a consultant for corporations, helping them establish safe reporting mechanisms and accountability structures. Her mission was simple: prevent what happened to her from happening to anyone else. Jessica had enrolled in law school, determined to become an advocate specifically for workplace harassment survivors. She wanted to change the laws that had failed to protect her. And Catherine Wright, David's ex-wife, had become an advocate for the children of abusers. She worked with therapists to help kids understand that their father's behavior wasn't their fault, and that they could break the cycle of abuse. Even David's own adult children from his first marriage reached out to the victims privately, apologizing for their father's behavior and expressing their support for justice. 18 months after that morning in Rosie's diner, Victoria returned to work one last time as a waitress. It was her final shift before leaving to work full-time at the clinic. Rosie had organized a small celebration. The regular customers, the ones who'd been there that morning and heard Victoria's confrontation, came in to say goodbye. The older man from Booth 9, who wasn't a regular customer at all but a journalist, everyone knew that now, came in and shook her hand. "You changed the world," he told her. That story went viral. It inspired 47 other women to come forward against their abusers. You don't even know the ripple effect you created. Victoria smiled. She didn't do it for the ripple effect. She did it because she couldn't stay silent anymore. She did it because her pain deserved to mean something. She did it because 17 other women deserved to be believed. As she took off her apron for the final time, she looked around Rosie's diner, the same diner where she'd worked for 3 years, where she'd rebuilt herself piece by piece, where she'd finally found the courage to stand up. "Thank you," she told Rosie, embracing her, "for giving me a place to land when I had nowhere else to go." "Thank you," Rosie replied, "for showing me that courage is contagious." On her last day, a customer left her a note with a generous tip. Victoria read it. "You reminded me that I'm allowed to say no. You reminded me that my body belongs to me. You reminded me that I'm not alone. Thank you for your strength." Victoria folded that note carefully and put it in her pocket. Not as payment, not as validation, but as a reminder that her story mattered, that her pain had been transformed into power, that speaking truth had cost her something, but staying silent would have cost her everything. She walked out of Rosie's diner into the afternoon sunlight, no longer invisible, no longer afraid, no longer broken. Just Victoria Monroe, survivor, advocate, nurse, and proof that even when you're up against a billionaire with unlimited resources, truth and courage are more powerful than any amount of money. David Wright would spend the next 15 years in federal prison thinking about what he'd lost. Victoria would spend the next 15 years building the life he'd tried to destroy. And that was justice. If this story touched you, leave a comment sharing the lesson you learned. Subscribe for more stories of redemption, justice, and human strength. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. I pray for peace, hope, and blessings to fill your day. May you always find the courage to speak your truth, no matter how powerful the forces trying to silence you.